I'm Eric Siegel, CEO, co-founder of Gooder AI. In this video, I'll overview how to get started hands-on using Gooder AI. Basically, go to gooder.ai/hands-on. You'll see a series of 6 short instructional videos on exactly how to get going. It's really quite easy. You can use it on any type of predictive model for most predictive AI projects. And any data scientist, if you've got the model, you've got your test data, or you've got monitoring data, out of time sample data, whatever you've got, it's quite straightforward. Let me cover a couple of the details to give you a general sense here. First of all, the data requirements are super straightforward. They consist of the scored test data. So if you have that test data, which includes the label, the dependent variable, and then you add a column for the actual output of the model for each of those cases. So in the very simplest use case, and this, hopefully you go a bit further than this, but you can get started even with simply just 2 columns, which is that dependent variable, such as response, the yes or no, the binary value that the model's intending to predict, and then the actual model score itself. If you're comparing multiple models, you've got a separate row for each one. Here's another example for fraud detection. On the left of the dependent variable, whether the transaction is fraudulent, and you've got the score here. We're comparing 3 models, random forest and 2 XGBoost models. And now, ideally though, you go a bit further, you could just include all of the independent variables that are probably in the test data anyway, or at least some of them. You generally don't need most of them. Here's 3 more columns, including the amount of the transaction, which is definitely something that's very helpful to make a more accurate estimation of the value of this, in this case, fraud detection. If you are doing modeling in Python, if you're using sklearn, scikit-learn, or XGBoost, then from within Python, it's even easier to just sort of get the data in there and get Gooder going, get it open. So if you've got the models, you load a library called Gooder_AI, and it includes this function valuate models. So you just give it those models, scikit-learn and XGBoost, as well as the test data, which typically has a separate dependent variable. The dependent variable column is a separate variable, what have you. And then valuate model turns that into the test data as Gooder AI needs it, which is basically it puts it all into one flat table and adds those model scores for any models you've given it as input. And it creates what's called a configuration file. And in general, whether you're coming from Python or not, to use Gooder AI, you need to always give it 2 things. One is the test data. You don't have to give it the models. It doesn't care how the models work. It only cares how well they work, and that's represented, that's tracked by the scored test data. And in that way, that's what makes it so universal. It'll work with any predictive model. And then you also have to give it what's called a configuration file. It's a type of JSON, but you never have to edit the JSON. You can start, if you're a first-time user, you can start with our standard general starter config file, which is available. Everything you need is if you go to gooder.ai/hands-on. And in general, when you're using the product, if you change anything in the configuration, anything in the setup, and then you can save the config file to save a new JSON, you can always start from there. You'd never have to directly modify the JSON itself. And then those go into Gooder. Valuate model will even open Gooder for you. So it works in Jupyter Notebooks. It works slightly differently from Databricks, all the information there. And this is, by the way, an example of what it looks like to actually call the valuate model function. And you can see here we've given it a list of models in the second line here. We've given it the models. Later down here, we'd give it the test data. But this kind of setup is available in some example notebooks that are available at gooder.ai/hands-on. So everything you need. And that was just a quick overview of the kinds of things covered in the 6 short intro videos for getting started hands-on. Everything you need is at gooder.ai/hands-on.